Welcome again to another segment of ACRP TV. Today, our spotlight is on study startup challenges, and we have a special guest, Ashley Davidson, who is the Senior Director of Vault Study Startup at Veeva. And full disclosure, I should just say, I love the Veeva folks, and on my computer right here, my little camera guard was from Veeva, so thank you. It's very nice. I appreciate it. So let's just jump in, Ashley, and you and I have talked before, and actually several times in the past, about study startup challenges and the timeline, and it's getting longer. And clearly what we're doing right now isn't working so well. So if you could talk about, set the stage for us a little bit. What's the landscape right now for study startup challenges?
Yeah, study startup has been a problem really for so long, for about the entire time I've been in the industry, which is a little over 18 years. And it's one of the most time and resource intensive parts of the clinical trial. If you think about the different phases of a clinical trial, it's really the entire first third of a trial, and can take, sometimes up to 61% or so of the total trial timeline. So as you can see from that, it's super important. The impacts of startup are really pretty long lasting. So if there are a lot of challenges or delays in startup, a lot of times it can really affect things well into conduct, even, the timeliness of patient enrollment, the ability to enroll the right kinds of patients. So it's really pretty critical. And I think one of the big problems of study startup is that it's really still pretty largely manual across the industry. Each year, Veeva releases our Unified Clinical Survey, and where we kind of discuss the state of the industry. But this year, we actually wanted to focus specifically on startup and address some of those challenges. And so we released a dedicated study startup pulse report. And that report showed that an overwhelming 81% of the industry still uses spreadsheets today. So the problem with that is that everybody loves spreadsheets, right? They're super easy to use, they're super flexible. But what spreadsheets don't allow you to do is really, in a proactive way, manage a lot of activities, understand where you need to focus your attention or where you need to address something. So they're actually very passive.
And spreadsheets are not very good in real time. And as
That's right, yeah.
Change very quickly in clinical trials.
Yeah, that's right. You got to be able to, especially in startup, react quickly, make really informed decisions in a quick way. So, spreadsheets don't really allow folks to do that, and they're very inefficient in the way that people manage things. What we have seen in the last couple of years is the industry moving towards technology, but a lot of the technologies that they're using really aren't purpose-built for a lot of the nuances that study startup presents. So there are a lot of times systems that maybe they've already invested in, CTMS systems or SharePoint systems, for example. So there have been some improvements, and about half of the survey respondents kind of fall into this particular category. The other challenge, though, that I see is that some organizations may also be using purpose-built systems, but those systems are really disconnected from a lot of the other clinical systems that they need to use, and they're not very seamless in that way. So I think, it's a combination of the fact that study startup is already such a complex area by nature. Protocols themselves are more and more complex year over year. But also organizations really aren't using the right kind of technology, which is, I think, really continuing to compound the problem.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that because in this industry, and it's not unique to the clinical trial industry, but often technology is looked at as the magic solution, the silver bullet. But a lot of pressure is put on the technology. And, also it's important to have things that are tailored to what you need specifically done. You need training, So, talk about how, I don't want to say the limits of technology, but what are the best ways to harness because there's good tools out there if you know how to use them.
Yeah, so I kind of always say that you're right, it's not just technology, it's really sort of a three-legged stool, if you will. It's technology, people, and process. And each one of those things is super important, and they have to be equally focused on in order to really move the ball forward. So you can have great technology, for example, but if you haven't optimized your processes, you're still doing things the same redundant way, for example, and you're not resourced adequately to be able to leverage that technology, then you're going to have a lot of the same challenges. So change management, for example, has to kind of go along with the technology. So each one of those things is super important. And I often tell our customers that they have to treat each as important equally and really focus on all three legs of that stool, not just the technology part.
Let's also address the giant elephant in the room is COVID. Obviously,
Yeah.
you and I are speaking here in late August. Kids are trying to go back to school, colleges with mixed success. Things seem to be a little calmer in New England, relatively speaking, with COVID, but it's clearing up other places. How has COVID exacerbated the study startup challenge?
Wow, I mean, at this point, what hasn't COVID impacted, right? So, and I think the same is true for our industry. I hate to even talk about a silver lining in a situation of this nature, but I think for even a couple of years leading up to the current global situation, our industry has really been approaching an inflection point for quite some time. And that inflection point is one of really the necessity of evolution and innovation, right? To rethink the way that we're executing trials together and the ways that we're collaborating with one another to do that. And specifically where startup is concerned. So I think that COVID has really created this sense of urgency to speed up clinical research and to really start to transform it, like you said earlier, not just improve it, but really change the way we're doing things. I think since COVID hit, we've seen a lot of studies that have been disrupted in one way or another, obviously, a lot of stoppages, delays. And the shelter in place orders that we're seeing all over the globe also have really slowed down a lot of different processes like remote monitoring, for example, or just exchanging trial information and documents, for example. That's obviously one of the key pieces of startup, a lot of that back and forth with sites. So I really think it's caused a lot of significant delays in research that have been planned this year. What that delay and sort of that backlog is now creating is this need for trials to start up even faster than before in order to test, efficiency, effectiveness of treatments and vaccines for the virus, but also other non-COVID trials that may now be starting back up. So there's a lot of intense focus on startup now because of that reason.
We've been speaking here with Ashley Davidson. She's the Senior Director of Vault Study Startup at Veeva. Our ACRP TV spotlight on study startup challenges. Ashley, I want to thank you for all your time. And the survey you mentioned at the beginning too is also an excellent resource. We'll make sure people have access to that as well. But thank you so much for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me.